If you're watching this, that means I'm not there. So Mr. Custer will give you the notes outline. You can fill it out as we go through this. You can pause at any time to write in what you need to fill in. We're not going to do the entire section. Hopefully, I can get back tomorrow. We can do the last part of that. But I wanted to get the notes done today since you guys have done almost everything else for the first section. So the first section of this chapter is called New Party in Power. And you guys have already read about the election of 1800 and how vicious it was, and the insults and rhetoric going back and forth between Adams and Jefferson's supporters. So what we're going to do today is kind of get into the background of that and what became of the first part of Jefferson's first term. So as you can see, and as you guys already read about, on the Federalist side of things, you have John Adams, who's the sitting president, running for re-election, and his chosen candidate for vice president is Charles Pinckney from South Carolina, who also ran with him the first time in 1796. And of course, on the other side is the vice president, Jefferson, and his chosen person who's going to go with him is Aaron Burr from New York, who we all know about from Hamilton. And he hasn't shot Hamilton yet by this point. It's a couple years down the road, but he's already got a pretty good reputation as a conniver and ambitious politician from New York. So if you look at elections in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there's a lot of differences from what you and I see today every 4 years when we have presidential elections. First off, campaigns didn't have direct campaigning. I'm sorry, the candidates didn't have direct campaigning. You would never have seen John Adams or Thomas Jefferson out talking to voters or giving speeches. They didn't travel. They went about their daily business. There was no debates. There was never any face-to-face arguments or discussions. Supporters would write public letters to newspapers arguing for their candidate. And of course, there was no political ads, being that there was no TV, radio, or internet. Even in newspapers, there was no ads. So basically, you knew who was running. Supporters would put information out there, but that was about it. Candidates did create policy statements, told you what they stood for, and their supporters would make attacks against the other candidate. But pretty much campaigning was seen as ungentlemanly, and the candidates didn't do it. It's very different from what we see today, and of course campaigning never stops. We're still over 2 years out from the next election, and basically we already know who's going to run, and they're campaigning as we speak. But some of the insults, some of the rhetoric that was going back and forth between the two sides, Federalists made a lot of attacks on Jefferson's character. They told the old story that he robbed the widow and children of their trust fund. It wasn't true. They said he was an atheist because of his papers on the separation of church and state in Virginia. He wasn't. He was not terribly religious, though, but he was not an atheist. But the biggest attack against him, which happened to be true, was the fact that he had fathered a few children with his teenage slave, Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was a slave on his plantation in Virginia, Monticello, along with her brothers. In fact, her mother and Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law had children too. So there had been some past experiences here, but it was a well-known secret that this was going on. It wasn't uncommon in the South between masters and slaves. The difference here is you have a very high-profile politician involved in it. As you can see here on the screen, an advertisement or a short article in a newspaper says, "The President again," and it says, "It is well known that the man whom delights the people to keep his honor, and for many years has kept his concubine, her name is Sally." Basically saying everybody knows about this, and of course, that's pretty scandalous. Here you see a political cartoon from a Federalist newspaper in New England in the 1800s. You see Thomas Jefferson's being accompanied by the devil. He's inebriated. He is trying to pull down a monument of the government. You can see Washington and Adams' name on here. Basically saying that, again, alluding to the atheism that his opponent said he had, trying to rip down all the accomplishments of the previous two presidents. On the other side, Jefferson, his supporters, they made fun of Adams. They said he was a hypocritical fool and a tyrant for the Alien and Sedition Acts. They made fun of his weight, his appearance. They called him his rotundity because he was short, squatty, and fat. There was rumor that they perpetuated saying that he wanted his son to marry the daughter of King George III and create a political dynasty here in the United States. Again, not true. And maybe the best insult, he was called a hermaphrodite. He was neither a man or a woman. So you can see, even 200 years ago, it was pretty vicious. It was a lot like we see today. In fact, some of these insults you wouldn't even hear in some of our campaigns in the modern day. So, as the Electoral College gives their final totals, you can see on the screen, Jefferson and Burr tie at 73 votes apiece. Adams is in third, Pinckney's in fourth. So now you have an issue, because under the original system, whoever had the most electoral votes becomes president. Whoever gets the second most becomes vice president, and you have a tie. So this means the election goes to the House of Representatives. So what had happened? Each elector had 2 votes. The one was for president, the other one was for vice president. One Republican elector was supposed to throw his vote away, but he didn't. He forgot, and he voted again for Burr, which led to the tie. In the House of Representatives, they had 35 votes before a Federalist from Delaware. His name's James Baynard. He's the only representative from the state of Delaware since it's so small. Finally abstains, and that breaks the tie, and Jefferson becomes president, and Burr becomes vice president. Now, one of Jefferson's biggest supporters during all this was his old enemy, Alexander Hamilton. And the reason Hamilton supported Jefferson over Burr is because he felt that while he didn't agree with Jefferson on many things, they did not see eye to eye. He felt that Burr was the much more dangerous character and would be conniving and lead the country to ruin. So the impact of the election of 1800 simply is this. The peaceful transfer of power is established. If you lose the election, you leave. And of course, Adams did that. He wasn't happy. He boycotted the inauguration ceremonies, but he did leave. And the 12th Amendment was passed. And essentially what this means is we can't have exactly this situation again. Now electors vote for the president and vice president separately. So how do you patch up the country after a vicious round of elections such as this? Jefferson understood that his initial speech to the United States, to the citizens, had to mend the fences. So you read his speech yesterday in class. We didn't get a chance to kind of preview it, but he said, we're all Republicans, we're all Federalists, basically meaning we're all one. Yes, we've had a lot of sharp divisions, we've had a lot of arguing back and forth, but now, we're all in this together. We all need to work together to succeed. Jefferson wanted to give the appearance of an everyday person, even though he was very rich and powerful. He wore plain clothes to the inauguration. He walked. He didn't ride in a carriage. He said he wanted a wise and frugal government, which is a little different from what the Federalists had previously championed. And again, he believed the states could better protect people's liberties than the federal government. So you have a fundamental switch in philosophy here. Whereas the Federalists believe you need a strong federal government, the Democratic Republicans believe the opposite. They believe the states is where it needed to be. So you read about in the book Jeffersonian democracy. Well, what does that mean? Essentially what it means is this. Jefferson's vision of the country was opposite of Hamilton's. Whereas Hamilton wanted stock markets and banks and industry, Jefferson believed we should be an agricultural nation. He thought only through farming could people be free of debt, free of what they call wage slaves. You controlled your own destiny. You owned your own land. You provided for yourself. He believed debt and factory work robbed the man of his independence. You had to answer to somebody else, not your own will. And he believed, listen, government must be small, must not violate the rights of the individual. The less government, the better. And essentially, he believed the opposite of Hamilton. If it's not in the Constitution, you cannot do it. Because remember, in the last chapter, we talked about the National Bank. There's nothing in the Constitution about it. Hamilton created it. And Jefferson said, well, you can't do that. It's not in the Constitution. His interpretation is, if it's in the Constitution, you can do it. If it's not, then you can't. And that's where we'll stop.